Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Greater Niagara Fishing Expo. We are at the Fish Hawk Electronics booth here at the Expo. I'm Chris Larsen, along with Matt Yablonsky and Captain Vince Pierleoni, and hope everybody gets to enjoy the show this afternoon. We're talking a little fishing, just kind of visiting, hanging out here in the booth, and hope to have a good time with everybody. Vince, you had some ideas and some things that you wanted to talk with captains. We're going to have Captain Anthony Ellis on in a little bit. Go ahead and kind of fire away with some of the things you wanted to ask Matt. I'm going to stand up and just adjust this camera just a little bit.
Sure. I was just going to ask Matt, what he felt overall about our season. We're docked 5 miles apart, and we're in the famous western end of Lake Ontario, and just what you thought overall of the season last year.
Last year was an interesting season. We had fish to catch all year. Maybe some different species or different amounts of species that we don't normally catch, but we had some salmon early, good salmon bite, and then they kind of filtered away, and then coho showed up. Boy, I'll tell you, that was fun catching cohos, and never seen cohos in that number before. I ended up running a whole coho spread, downriggers, divers, long lines, and customers wanted to eat them. They're like, we love cohos, let's keep catching them. So that was cool, and then when everybody kind of got a little bit tired of the cohos, the kings showed up. We had good king fishing in July, some nice fish. Had to fish them a little deeper than normal, 100, 120 down some days. They were eating when you got them down there, and then we finished off the season with some stagers, and brown trout fishing was good. And it just, I thought it was a pretty darn good season.
Yeah, it just goes to show a lot of effort's been made in the Great Lakes, rehabbing habitat, tributaries. We got some data back that they feel 3/4 of those cohos were naturally produced, which is saying a lot because they're a yearling fish when they leave the rivers. So, the habitat's improving and the future certainly looks bright. But yeah, we had to lean on the cohos ourselves, but it wasn't really any kind of a booby prize because they were well above average early in the year, and highly sought after food fare. And then they're a riot on a rod and reel because they're suicidal. They like to go under the boat and give us a lot of grief with the tackle. If somebody's turning around and reaching for their sub when the rod goes off, they're probably too late. So that's what happened. But no, I agree with you, Matt. The Chinook were a little later to the party this spring, and I think that it was mainly because we just had such a big crop of alewives. They were dying off due to overpopulation, a lot of mild winters. It's very common in the Great Lake to have the alewives explode like that, and that's exactly what happened. So at the time when it's hardest on them at the end of winter, we were losing a lot of alewives, which made it for easy feeding for the Chinook. So once they got that taken care of, things became much more normal.
Well, the young of the year alewives that were produced last year, the amount of 1-year-old alewives we had last year pretty much outnumbered all the adults. So there was a huge recruitment of smaller alewives. I think that's what maybe helped those cohos grow, or it seemed like our browns were bigger, and the small 1-year-old salmon seemed bigger and heavier. So having a lot of a smaller bait to eat, they got a chance to really grow and put on some weight being young.
It's going to be interesting to see what that translates to with the Chinook, because the young Chinooks definitely got a big bump out of those small alewives.
Oh, sure.
So if that puts them in position to feed on those larger alewives sooner, it doesn't matter that we had a kind of a tougher winter, because they should be ahead of the 8 ball there.
Yeah, when the alewives and all the smaller salmon go into winter full and and healthy and got some fat reserves, it definitely helps them get through the winter into the spring. And what I was talking to Brian Waddell at the one meeting, at the Lockwood meeting, the spiny sea fleas, they've given the alewives another month and a half of food to eat. Once the plankton and that comes out of the water, they got those sea fleas. So the sea fleas have actually fattened up the alewives going into winter because they live longer, because the water stays remotely up to 40 degrees, until January. So, if there's one good thing about sea fleas is they're feeding our alewives, so they're a better shot going into winter.
They're really not a problem, other than for us to have to pick off our lines. Even the juvenile fish, these natural fish we're talking about, gives them another food source when they're too small to eat the bait fish.
Yeah, it's just another food source for them, and they're annoying, but they're not there all the time. You get a certain time when the wind blows, the water's right, where they're bad, and then you go a little deeper or shallower, and usually they're not there. So, I work around them because it seems like the bait fish are in there and the fleas and the kings are in there with the fleas. So I don't try to avoid them.
Right. A lot of times we got to put up with the fleas because that's where the bulk of the
fish are at.
targets are.
Let's get into kind of some detailed stuff if we can. One of the things that I get constantly asked is leader length and what you guys are using for leaders. So can you talk a little bit about that, like what you guys do for leader length when you're running different setups, whether you're how much line you got past your ball on your downriggers, how much line do you have at the end of your if you're running lead core. Talk a little bit about those leader lengths and kind of what you're running, because I get tons of questions all the time about that.
You want to go first, Matt?
Sure. Well, start with downriggers, because I think almost everybody has downriggers that's going to fish. I run 15-pound test for all my spoons, and I run 8 feet of it. So I'll put a little barrel swivel and a bead to my main line. So I like to run thinner line just to my spoons. I change it quite often, being 15-pound, but I liked 8 feet of that, and then I have 20-pound fluorocarbon behind that. My lengths behind the downrigger ball start off in the morning. Usually start one at 20, one at 25, and one at 30 to give the spoons a little different look. I think the shorter one's a little faster, one with a little slower, to give the fish something to look at. And then a lot of times they'll tell me which one they want. If they hit the 30 first, then I might stretch my other 3 out. Just give them a choice, but usually between 20 and 30 feet on my downriggers. I'm a slide diver guy, so for my divers, I run my high spoons. I'll run them 38 feet from the diver. I slide the diver all the way up to my wire, give them, and I run 8 feet of 15-pound on my spoons on them as well. As far as divers go, I'm pretty stuck. My flasher's all going about 12 feet. It's 2 arm lengths, lock it in and just send it, and usually don't vary from that too much. Lead core, long lines, I start off with 30 feet, and I think once it gets down to about 20 feet, I'll change my leader out.
Sounds really similar. Yeah, I think what you opened up with the rigger leads, it's the old listen to the fish.
Right.
Fish tell you what they want, and you got to listen to them. But that's pretty much the only thing I would vary on is I'm willing to run a little tighter than that, especially in watercolor. We get some murky water sometimes, and we'll want to choke them because we feel like the fish know where the weights are through vision or by feeling where the weight is, and they're going to investigate it. And if you can cheat it in a little bit when you got murkier water, that can sometimes be the ticket.
Yeah.
But as far as dropping it back, very similar to what Matt was saying on the riggers. I run a straight 20-pound on my spoons. Flashers, I like 30-pound. And when we get into the lead core, same thing. I'm probably between 30 and 40 feet for a leader, and then sometimes the fish will, they'll go against the grain, against the book. You'll get a hot rod, and you'll be like, what's that leader? And you'll check it, and it's a lot shorter.
Different, yeah.
So, yeah, usually by the time it gets to about 20 feet, because we're always looking for nicks, we're always retying. But, yeah, I wouldn't regularly let it get under that.
Yeah.
And then same thing on the coppers, similar leaders. And Matt is definitely known as a slide diver guy. I'm a little more old school, a lot of hand lining leaders, but we had an exciting launch we're learning about.
Yeah.
Shane from Dreamweaver here today has got a new, much easier to use.
Sliding.
It doesn't slide till it trips.
Still, it needs to slide, right?
It's going to be a lot quicker to deploy. Should be easier on the line, and he got them here for people to look at in his booth.
Yeah, it's going to be a state-of-the-art thing. I'm excited to use them. I love my slide divers, but sometimes you're always looking for a better mousetrap. Mm-hmm. And this one just seems like it's going to be easier to adjust the tension on it, a little less foolproof, having some different parts in it. So definitely looking forward to seeing that new diver from Dreamweaver.
So not to lose any of the newer guys, the guys I've had a chance to talk to here so far today, very new to the trout and salmon fishing. The divers can be very confusing. because why so many colors if we're running them so far behind the? It can be an attractor, but it can also be no different than your downrigger balls. They can be a little shy. So that would be the reason to slide them back. But with all the colors that are available, there's times super deep, different species. There's guys that might run real short to the diver for lake trout, but will stretch it back for brown trout or salmon.
Right.
And so they all have their place. It's not just, marketing.
True.
That's why there's so many colors. But the reason to slide them back, they're a little bit spooked of tackle on that particular day, or they have been for a week. You're going to want to drop that leader back.
Yeah, and I think another advantage of a sliding diver is once it trips, it planes out with the line. With a normal diver, it's still angled, so a lot of times you're fighting a fish, you're fighting that diver. With the sliding divers, they plane out and they'll slide on the line. So say let's take a steelhead that wants to come up 20 to 30 feet, it doesn't have to pull the diver. The diver slides back on the line as it goes up. When the fish goes back down, the diver will slide back down. So you're putting a little less pressure on the hooks as well when you're fighting fish with a diver that's not fixed, it's moving. So I think that's a huge advantage, especially for those cohos that are little kamikazes behind the back of the boat.
So Matt, when you're running your slide divers, do you like to have fish takes off on a run? Do you like it to not trip right away?
No, I set them tight enough so it kind of helps set that hook, and then I want it to trip. I want it to slide and start being free on the line. Seems like you get a little better hookup with that diver. It's just you and the rod. You're not fighting the diver. So I want them to just tight enough so it sets the hook and then trip and slide down.
That you can get 10 different answers to that question.
Yeah. Yep.
So the other question I had for you guys, we talked about it a little bit earlier today on the show, and you brought it up, Vince, is that there was a lot of bait available out in the lake this last year. When I came to your ports in the spring, there were dead alewives kind of floating everywhere. How do you think that will affect, if it will affect at all, this season, the fact that there was such a bait boom last year?
Well, like we led off with, we're hoping that it did what it did for that crop of cohos last year. We're hoping that it caused those younger Chinooks to put on weight rapidly, where they may have had to seek out their size of alewife to eat. It was literally everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
So we're hoping that those fish got a big enough bump that it will carry through, and maybe we'll see some extra big fish this year, which I'm thinking we will, because we saw some very nice fish late in the season. Matt and I both fish into October, and we saw, non-mature Chinooks out there that anybody would be proud to hold up for a picture. So they're going to still be in the system this year, and for their final season in the lake. So we're hoping that rippled through the whole population, and that could make for some really nice fish.
Oh yeah, and a lot of those dead alewives that were floating, a lot of it was because of the density of the alewives. There were just so many of them, that there wasn't maybe enough food, and you had some weaker ones. So it's kind of a good sign that you saw that, because that means there was a lot of them. So hopefully it doesn't affect us too much. I just hate to hear the doom and gloom of, oh, the alewives are gone, we lost them, they all died. No, it's not what it's, when you talk to the guy that does the alewife studies, that's just natural how it goes. If they're too thick and they're too dense, there's going to be some weak ones, and you're going to see them. So, that shouldn't affect us as far as our overall numbers of alewives, losing some.
When they die off, they're usually the biggest, some of the biggest ones. They're maybe could have hung on another year or two anyway, but because they're getting out-competed for the remaining food, so they will often be the ones that die.
Yeah.
Or alewives that rush it in the spring to make their spawning movements could get caught in a temp change, and that is known to kill off some alewives too, because they're spending all winter in 39-degree water, and then they move in when the water starts warming up. And then if it goes backwards, that can be hard on them too.
Just get trapped in there.
You said both of you guys fish late into the year, October. That's a time of year where most of your average recreational anglers have packed up, put it in for the year. Tell me a little bit about what it's like fishing Lake Ontario in your area that time of year. Obviously I'm sure there's a lot less traffic on the boat, or on the lake, but what is the fishing like at that time of year?
Well, what I seem to see is in that September, late September, early October, is the lake is as warm as it's going to get. We find more warmer water that time of year than ever. So that shallow water just gets filled with warm water. And as you go north, you see on your fish hawk, you'll see it go from like 70 down, it's 70 degrees. And then once you get out a little further, at that 70 feet, you'll see it cooling off. So you get kind of a really good break, and those fish will hold on that break. And I'm out of Wilson, and Vince is out of Olcott, we're 6 miles apart. I'm closer to the Niagara River, so I usually launch and go to the west and get closer, the area we call 6 Mile. That's where the river meets the lake and it kind of swirls. Those temperatures will just stay there for weeks. And those fish find it, and we get nice big steelhead. You'll see your immature kings for next year. Once the matures move out, all those other fish are like, woohoo, we get the favored water. Let's go hang out on that temp break. So we get beautiful steelhead, immature kings, 2 and 1 year olds. Last year, the 1 year olds, some of them we were catching were like 8 pounds. They were just fat. Mm-hmm. So it's just a really cool time because the water is just different than you get any other time of the year.
Yeah, and because we're where we're located, that river flow, it continues pretty concentrated, at least to 30-mile point and even beyond if it's stable enough. And you get a lot of good southwest, west winds. Even northwest can compress it. But then those breaks get really accentuated. I mean, they're that much sharper. So the fish will travel like a highway. And he's right, there's so much warm water in there that a lot of times that area where it finally breaks cooler will hold a lot of bait fish because they got to feed. The bait has to feed. Winter's coming. So they're lined up on that fertile river water, and they're feeding too, and then the game fish find them. And just like spring or summer, that early fall period is about stability. So if you get some good stable weather, it's lights out fishing.
Yeah, some of the best fishing I had last year was, October. The river. I have another boat, and I fished the river as well. The salmon run, they weren't coming in yet, or it was a little slow. So I gave my guys the option. Let's go back out in the lake. I'm on a good bite out there, and it was fun. I mean, good eating fish, healthy fish, and it's nice to kind of be have the place to yourself sometimes too.
Yep, no doubt about it.
What were some other things you had, Vince?
Well, Matt, what do you think we got coming up? I know we're encouraged by what we saw with the Chinooks. How do you think the season's going to go?
Well, I think we're going to have a really good king season. We ended last year with a lot of 1 year olds that were healthy. Those should all be 2 year olds. And we had some nice fat 2 year olds too that were coming a little deeper. They weren't up high with the other steelhead and the immatures, but they were a little deeper. I think we got a good king season. Cold water, if there's a lot of food around and that bait migrates to the shoreline, kings are coming with it. I think we're going to have a good king season. Might start just a little later than normal, but hopefully our late April, early May is good. May has been a little iffy the last few years with the temperatures. I think May is going to be back to a normal.
Yeah, it could really be hot and heavy. We get some good hard breaks out there. That's where the fish hawk is invaluable. We're going to have that real Arctic temperature water in a big wall because that river comes out of there. Once the ice clears out of there, it skyrockets in temperature. Yeah. And so that brings that fish along the south shore there. And some years it's more spread out, and other years it's more concentrated. But I think it's going to be a little more what we would call a traditional spring. Really encouraged by the amount of brown trout around.
Oh man.
Yeah, so they're going to be that much bigger. Yeah. Because they had a strong winter on browns. Any of the tribs that hold brown trout, very, very good. And steelhead seem to be getting bigger again. For a while there, the average size was down, but they look to be up too.
Yeah, the steelhead we're catching in the river this winter, seem to be averaging around 8 pounds. Like, that's a pretty good average. We see a couple smaller ones and a few bigger ones, but to catch most of your fish being 8 pounds to 9 pounds is really good. And the browns in the river, lots of browns, fat, healthy browns. So that gives us something to fish for early season. We should have a really good brown trout season.
So Matt, what did you see for spoon sizes last year on the different species?
Man, that might sound weird, but most of my fish wanted Magnum spoons almost all year long. even the smaller fish, they were just chasing the mag spoons with a lot of mature alewives and a lot of those dying alewives that we were talking about. When they start getting weak down deep and then they float up, they were all big magnum alewives. So even my smaller fish seem to be coming on mag spoons, a lot of them most of the year.
I completely agree, and I think it had to do with matching the hatch.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what they were eating. They were easy pickings.
Yeah.
And even though we had just an overabundance of those small alewives, the fish that we're targeting, which are the larger ones of each species, they were eating the big alewives.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem running magnum spoons. Even, when we were trying to catch, target brown trout, sometimes you just have your kings spread out, moving a little shallower just to find some kings, and all of a sudden you find browns, and they're eating flasher flies and magnum spoons. So the browns didn't seem to be too shy, last year when you'd run into them.
Let's talk a little bit about setups, and this is another. I'm just trying to bring out some questions I get from people throughout the year. Talk a little bit about the knots you're using. How are you rigging things? How are you joining like your lead core to your leaders? And what are you doing when you're tying off your lures? What are you using for knots to kind of just make sure everything's secure?
My favorite knot for fluorocarbon, when I'm tying my swivels, my hooks, lures, everything, is a polymer knot. I've used a polymer knot forever. So if it's terminating to the end, it's a polymer knot. My other favorite knot is a Unity Uni knot. So when I'm doing my lead core, what I do is I'll strip out about 6 inches of lead core, and I'll just use the sheathing to tie a Unity Uni knot for my lead core. I don't use the traditional lead core knot anymore because we all have braid backer now, and trying to fish a lighter braid through the lead core I'm like, there's got to be a better way. So I've switched to the Unity Uni knot, and the only other knot that I use other than that is an Albright knot. And I use that on my slide divers when I'm tying my wire to my leader. I use an Albright knot. So Albright knot, Unity Uni, and the polymer knot. Those are my 3 go-tos for everything.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on the polymer knot. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
I still do. I find at certain times, certain poundages of leaders, sometimes you got to revert back to the improved clinch knot to get it to slide without chafing.
Yeah.
But the polymer is the go-to to terminate the end. I still use the old blood knot when I'm doing like a reel topper situation, and I don't think there's almost zero chance of getting down on the spool. I'll tie a blood knot.
Yeah.
If somebody's kind of getting set up, can you talk a little bit about what they should look for in a rod and reel? What are some recommendations you'd have, and maybe just what should they be targeting as far as actions and those kind of things?
So I'll start with that. What I like for day in and day out use for most days on the lake with my Akuma reels is the 30 size. So what would that translate for you in the Shimano?
600.
600s?
Yep.
So that's, you got to have that size, right? Yeah. If you wanted to add more tackle, I start the year when we're brown trout, maybe some shoreline coho with 20 size. And just to have more fun in that 6 to 10 foot of water. But then I'll quickly change over to the 30s. And then we have 45s, 55s, which are
the 800s
for your lead cores and your coppers. You need a bigger reel for more capacity. Like Matt said, when you have braid now, you can get a lot more backing on a reel per size. Where with years ago, when we only had the monofilament, you were running out of capacity because of the diameter.
Right.
But as far as action goes, I personally favor at least 8 foot rods. 8.5 is my go-to. I like the give. I like a soft tip. I think it saves some fish at the boat on rigger fish.
Yep.
And then I might beef up the rods a little bit with flashers, but I still want a soft tip. So that's usually a medium. And then for divers, I like the 10.5 footers. with that parabolic action. I like a soft rod because I personally am not a snubber guy. Are you a snubber guy?
I'm not a snubber guy either.
So I like the rods to be soft. So it's going to take up some of that, those severe hits that we get, strikes, without bending a hook or popping on knot or something.
Right. I'm pretty similar. My downrigger rods, I don't change them for different species. My downrigger rods are 8.5-foot mediums. I've got some 8-foot medium lights that I use for brown trout, just because I want a softer tip so I don't pull hooks out on my brown trout. I also use those as my walleye rods. So those reels get used in the spring for brown trout, and then they get used in the summertime for walleye. The medium lights, I have 600 Dakotas on all of them. Just I like to have that amount of line on the spool if I'm running a planer board out, or I just like to have the amount of line on there. So I don't change my reel size. And then I do have different rods for flash and flies. A little bit beefier Shimano rod. Old Teloras, the black old Teloras were pretty stiff, but I like those for my flash or flies. The rest of my rods are a little softer. And then divers, I actually use the lead core copper Shimano Telora rod that has stainless steel guides. And I took the stainless steel guide off, put a twilly tip on the end. And I was really cautious when I first did it, but both sets of my divers run on 9-foot rods. And I haven't, or maybe they're 9.5. But my inside and my outside are the same length, and I was really cautious about that and not having different actions. But so far, the last few years, I haven't had any trouble with it. You got to be careful if you get a double on those two rods and the tips are together, but that doesn't happen very often.
Matt, really appreciate you coming on with us. You were here earlier, come back again. I know you got a busy weekend, so we're kind of saying goodbye to you for the rest of the weekend, but appreciate you joining us 2 shows in a row and love to have you with us, and it's fun to hear your insight. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about before we let you go for the weekend?
I don't know. I think we got a great show here. There's a lot of vendors, a lot of new products, a lot of excitement. So just come on out to the show and show some love, buy some tackle, and get ready for spring.
What's your website?
My website is getthenetwet.com, and it's WetNet Charters. I'm on Facebook at WetNet Charters. I've got the website, getthenetwet.com, so pretty easy to get a hold of.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you,
And
sir.
just want to thank Vince for finally meeting up with me on the show. He's asked me like 6 years in a row, come on, can you do it? I'm like, I've already made plans and I'm not going to be around, but just good to sit down here with you two guys and just chat a little bit.
Always fun to have you.
Excellent.
Great information
Thanks,
as
Chris.
always.
Appreciate it.
Captain Matt Yablonsky
All right, we'll see ya.
from
Take
Wet
care, buddy.
Charters.
Thank you.
You got
All right.
Captain Anthony
Thanks, man.
Ellis
Yep.
kind of hanging out here in the green room. We'll bring him in.
How you doing, Ben?
Welcome to the
you
show.
doing?
Yeah, thanks for stopping in.
Oh, we're here again.
We're going to share mics, so I'm going to
Okay.
just kind of hand it back and forth between the two of us. But appreciate you jumping in here today, and we really wanted it just to be the three of you guys and me kind of hanging out. But we also had some technical things, and this is just a way to make sure that everything worked well. So this is why we're doing it this way today. But first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your charter, and what you got going on.
Yeah, so my name's Captain Anthony Ellis. I fish out of Olcott. I've been there for like 12 years now, running a charter out of there. Kind of worked my way up from, I had a 26-foot Starcraft and worked my way up to, now we have a 35-foot Viking. So we've worked right up through as far as that. And we're running around 108 to 150 trips a season. So we're on the water quite a bit and throughout the whole season, and starting in April all the way to, well, last year we went into October.
We were just talking about that, yeah.
We were going late and still fishing, so that's kind of my as far as fishing history, and short of that, I'm a retired firefighter. And that's why I fish now.
Let's hear a little bit about, both you guys are out of the same port of Olcott. Tell us a little bit about that port and why you like it so much.
So my initial drive to the Olcott, because I grew up fishing the lake in the middle part of the lake, Rochester, Sodus, as I was a kid, and that was just based on where we lived. And Olcott kind of became the same thing. Like, I actually lived down in Salmon, so for me it's a straight shot up to the lake, and Olcott was the closest port and most suitable port for me to go out of, so that's where we fished. And then I come to love the port because of versatility of it. You know, we can run to the bar if we have to. We can fish out in front, and for the most part, we have our fishery out in front of our port, and we don't have to make long runs. Every now and then, yeah, we gotta make long runs, but for the most part, we got pretty good fishing out in front. We can find our fish, we can set up on them, and have good fishing. And we don't have to do a huge amount of traveling throughout the whole year. And that's kind of how I love it. And we have all the species we're trying to target, you know. Even throughout most of the season, you can, if you want to target salmon, you can. If you want to target brown trout, you can. And lake trout, you can target those fish if you really choose to target that certain species of fish. So it makes it a very well-rounded port to go out with. So that's why we go.
Definitely. So I got it.
He's got one. He's got one. Okay.
So Anth, last year you launched a company manufacturing artificial strips. Just touch on briefly if you have anything new this year.
So, yep, I did that last year. Ironically, my success with that specific, artificial bait wasn't as high as many others. Let's put it that way. And I had a lot of feedback on colors and what was working for other anglers, which was great. I'm glad it was working for them, because that's really why, for me to buy meat is not really an issue. I mean, I've made a product for individuals that struggle buying that meat, and they only work or fish on the weekends, and it's like, meat's expensive. So that's why I came out with the product, so it gives them an avenue to still fish meat. So that feedback was basically like blacks and natural colors with glow green dots. So we went back to the drawing board, and that's pretty much what we made. Our product is black, natural, silver, natural with green dots, and that's what 90% of everybody that came back was like, that's what we're catching our fish on. So obviously we're going to stick with that and make the product to what the fishermen want. My best was a gold and black, but same along the same lines. And so that's kind of where it's at. Still going, still making them. I had a lot of people from Michigan reach out after last year's show and like, hey, how do we get that stuff? So we were sending stuff out to them and getting it, because we're still small, very small company as far as product and what we can do, and but I can make stuff custom if I get the orders and guys want them, so it's not a big deal as far as that. So.
Tell me a little bit about that. I think that's something that, first of all, what's the name of your company?
Broken Rod Tackles.
Okay, Broken Rod Tackle, if you want to look up information on Anthony's company. But a lot of people, I think, are afraid to run meat. It just seems like, spoons are really easy to do. You tie them on, you go, and there isn't much to it. Tell me a little bit about running a meat program and how you do it. And obviously using artificial strips takes a lot of the hassle of meat away. But tell me a little bit about just running a meat program. How does that work? What do they need to think about and do when they're going to do that?
All right, so you're 100% right. So back to my whole meat program, and last year, like the artificial strips, and not that I didn't do good, but it just wasn't my top producer. That really comes back to I had such a good spoon program, and I didn't leave it. I just stayed with the spoon program for the season. We caught fish on meat and stuff, but I really stuck with a really strong spoon program. With the meat, it is intimidating. It was intimidating for me, 100%. You have to figure out a way that what works for you and take as many variables out of that meat program as you can if you're starting to run meat. And what I mean by that is there's a umpteen amount of different types of heads out there, Rye Davis, Dream, you can pick your favorites of what you want, and everybody has the reasons behind that. Colors, all that stuff, but just the heads itself. And I found for me, in running a meat program, is I run only musclehead meat, the musclehead products. And I think it takes the most variables out of a meat program, because you don't have to tune the head, they're all the same. You put either real or artificial cut bait in it, and you run your program, and you adjust your program based on speed and only speed. If you want it to be more lazy, you slow down, stretch out some leads. If you want a more active program, you speed up. But you don't have to worry about tuning the heads, making sure it's rolling the right way. So if you're trying to get into a meat program, in my professional opinion is if you take as many variables out of it, then you're going to have a more successful meat program and see results from that program. And that's kind of what's worked for me. Vince through the year, will be like, hey, we're running it on this, and I'll run all different types of products and name brands, but I always put a muscle head on the back of it because that's what I'm comfortable with. I know how it runs, I know how it rolls, I know what speeds I'm working with the rest of my program, because I normally run a multiple, program with spoons, flashers, meat. It's just not all one thing. And all those, in a nutshell, have different speeds that we're trying to accomplish with all those. So
how do you balance that?
So it's just about, I think it's more about where you have them in your spread. So I think I'm a little bit different than some charter captains, is all my rigs only have spoons on them. And then all my dipsies or long lines have meat or flasher flies on them. So I can control those speeds in that sense. Because they're longer, they're farther away from the boat. It doesn't take as much variables out of that equation, with your speeds, being so far and farther away from the boat, so it's more attractive to the fish. And then I use my riggers to draw them in closer with the spoons and that sort of thing. And I can stack my riggers with stacks and sliders and the spoons and get as many lures as I can out in that water column to try to target those fish. And then adjust from there, basically.
Vince, what does it look like? What does your meat program look like?
Well, I'm probably a lot different in that way from Anthony. Well, I will fish, meat on riggers. I'm very aware of how often they can get attacked, the strips. So if you got them on long lines, you may or may not know if it got hit or not. And that was one of the drivers behind these guys that started these artificial bait companies, was because they could take shots without coming apart. And because, believe me, you know how fast these fish are if you've watched underwater footage. So if the fishing's really good, why complicate it and put out something that may not be there 30 seconds after you get it out on a long line, right? So I'll listen to the fish and see, and it depends too. If you're specifically targeting big king salmon, you might be more apt to run meat on riggers, where if you've got 6 guys that want to all bat around often, you got to mix the species up, and you may attack it differently. But there's a place for both. There's no doubt. There's a place for real and there's a place for artificial. One of the things that Anthony didn't touch on, which I think is a big deal with artificial meat, is watercolor. They do rely on scent, but they rely on their vision a lot as well. And if you have murky water, a lot of this new fab stuff, it's glow or got sparkles in it or bright fluorescent colors, they're going to be more visible at a distance. So, that's a different thing that you could add to the game. But no, I would say day in and day out, most of the time I have spoons on my riggers for any number of reasons. But there are times where I would vary that.
I think that's really, obviously we know our fish like dots, and that's where the glow dots come in, and it's not too much. I feel you can have too much glow at times. It's just enough on the tail of that bait, artificial bait, flopping back there, that's what attracts those fish, is those glow dots in them colored murky waters, and absolutely, it draws them in there and gives them something to really hone in on, and the whole dot thing, we just know they like dots. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that when Anthony first sat down here, take the variables out of the equation. I've heard that from a lot of good fishermen, bass fishermen, Alaskan river fishermen. What a common mistake made by new anglers is they just try to do it all way too fast. And there's some very good small boat anglers that don't even put a long line in the water because they're going to be messing with that when they could be perfecting their 2 downriggers they got in the water, or as they grow, 2 downriggers, 2 divers, something like that, where that guy comes in, he's all happy, and the guy that tried to run this giant spread because he saw it depicted somewhere, he's just fighting tangles and doesn't quite understand why things went awry. And you know, so that's a really strong message that gets definitely overlooked. Keep it simple. Keep it simple and move on from there, you know.
I would say from that, what I see a lot of guys doing is they watch us go out and we catch our fish. And we have an array of tackle when we come back in. Like, you know, we have meat rigs on, we have flasher flies on, we have spoons on, just as an example. And then I see them up in the parking lot or they're putting their boats away, and they have a similar array of equipment, tackle on their lines, and they're struggling. They come down to like, man, we didn't catch a fish, or we're struggling not catching fish. And I always ask them, I'm like, and I look at their boat and I'm like, well, are you running all that I see hanging off your poles up there? And they're like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, just run one. Just run spoons, or just run flasher flies, or just run meat. Because if you're not catching fish on all of that, then something's missing. You don't have something figured out. Could be speed, could be just the simplicity of it. And simplify it by eliminating it and just run spoons. And when you start catching fish on spoons, then add something. So you can eliminate the variables of why is something not working. We can do that because we're out there every day, and I know if I'm going to run meat or flasher flies, what they don't see is I put the same color spoon on, but it's a lighter spoon because I'm running a slower speed. So I'm getting the action I need out of that spoon. Versus if I'm going to run a spoon heavy program, I'm going to run some heavier spoons with a faster speed. But I can't do that with a meat program because it's going to spin out the meat or it's going to be too fast. But they're not catching those fine details. They just see us coming in with fish. And they need to simplify their program to like start catching fish on spoons because it is the easiest. Then build your program from there. And if you want to just build it from meat, then fish meat and just concentrate on the speed you need for meat and run meat. And then you catch fish and then add in the spoons. Because then you can find the spoon that works for that speed that you're running the meat program. And you would have a better success rate overall.
Yeah, one of the things I like what you said there is, you know, not every spoon is the same. So if you have heavier spoons, you got to run a little bit faster. If you're running lighter spoons, you're going to run a little bit slower, and you're going to get that same action out of it. And that's something that I think a lot of people maybe don't understand when they're getting into it is, you know, those spoons don't all work the same way. You know, they don't understand the differences in what they're running. Can you talk a little bit about that and like how that helps you determine how you guys are going to fish in the daytime?
I think I'm gonna, go back to our last year's season with the Cohos. Salmon, we had some salmon in early May. We call them our local crop. They kind of vanished pretty quick with one of the weather system that came in. Then the Cohos came in. It was great. We had good Coho fishing. But if you fish from, we'll say April all the way through the end of June for those Cohos, which we did, it changed from April till June. And if you didn't change with those fish, your catch rate went drastically down. I mean, drastically. Like you'd literally go out one day and box out, and the next day find one fish that you could put in the boat, and it was like, why? What's happening? And you had to change with those fish. It went from they would eat anything, whatever you put out there, Coho classics, whatever you want to put out there, to where they were like, it had to be like literally a fly you would use in the stream fishing that we were trolling behind a spin doctor. It was like I don't even have them. I gotta go find some. And we were cutting peanut flies and cutting all the skirts off them, or had one piece of tinsel on them just to make it look smaller. And it was like, but if you didn't make those adjustments, you struggled later in that season. It was like, where'd they all go? And they were all there. They just were more picky on what they wanted to eat.
Yeah, so one of the terms that you hear in fishing, the easy ones were gone. And 100%. The rest of them were getting bigger and bigger. And there was plenty of bait around, so they were super, super choosy on size. And it changed day to day.
You have to make adjustments as you're fishing. And we say it all the time. If you go out there and you have a good day and you think you're going to go out there tomorrow and have a good day, expect a bad day because you're not adjusting to the changes. You're just not. You have to adjust every day because if you don't, you're going to have a bad day. And guess what? The next day you have a good day. You want to know why? Because you went out there and you made changes because you're not going to have 2 bad days in a row. Because you have to adjust with the fish as it goes through the season because if you don't, there's going to be struggle days.
Bottom line is you just have to have an open mind, especially as he showed. As the season wears on, expect those changes to be necessary because my term is the habitat is growing. These fish can use more of the lake. There's more temperature out there. So they're, in some cases, they're more spread out, which makes them less aggressive. So every little thing matters. You know, they're not worried about that one 10 yards away getting the lure because they're spreading out more. And you can make the same good catches. It's just the easy ones are gone.
I tell you, one of the things I did, I don't even know if I told you this during the season. So we were, we had to make those changes. And remember the spin fishes I made there? Mm-hmm. So spin fish, came out, and I actually took a spin fish and I put a lead behind the spin fish and used the spin fish itself as a attractor instead of a flasher fly or a flasher, and just used the spin fish with a little peanut on the back of it because I was struggling. Like, I need to make some changes here, and it was open-minded. Like, let's see if this thing will work, and then they started hitting. I think because it was less of a turbulence in the water, less of a flash, but it attracted those fish back to like it's all a little bit smaller, and it was like, okay, they wanted it again. But it was like you had to make those adjustments and like think outside the box of like, how can I make these fish bite, And I get that from Vince. Like, he's always like, make them bite, figure out something to make them bite, and make changes to make them bite because they're there. We know they're there. We've been catching them, day in and day out. So figure out something to make them bite, and I learned that from him way back. And you just got to make those fish want something that they want to bite. Make it happen.
We got a question coming in on YouTube, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase it a little bit, but the question is basically, when is the best time in your area to fish where I don't have to get in a boat and drive 5 miles this way or 5 miles that way? When would be the time on an Olcott where it's most likely that I can just go fish out front and be successful?
Most likely, I would say late June, early July.
100%. It's the most stable, I think.
Late June, early July. The other question that I had for you guys, we're here at the Greater Niagara Fishing Expo. There's people walking around. They look like they want to spend money. This is something that you see all over the place. I know they had a show in Michigan in January, another one in March coming up. For guys that are going out to sport shows this year and maybe they got a couple $100 to spend at the show, and it's an average, let's say it's an average angler with an average, what we would say, group of tackle, rods, everything. What would you say if they're going to walk in the door and spend $200 at the show? Well, where would their money be best spent? That's a good question.
That's a great question.
All right.
Is that yours?
That's mine. I just came up with it. Yeah.
I like it.
Give me an answer.
Oh, want me to go first?
Sure.
I would say, well, they got to know what makes them the happiest targeting wise. That's going to immediately determine, what they're going to buy. What time of the season are you going to be able to fish the most? Are you going to wait for the kids to get out of school, or you can't wait, you're chomping at the bit, you're going to ice out? There are some excellent new plugs on the market for stick bait fishing, shallow water. So if you are an ice out guy, you don't care if it's a little chilly, you could go through that 200 really quick on some really, really effective patterns that are coming out with, like bay rats that Dreamweaver makes now. There's new stuff at the Fish USA booth here in this show. Colors that have proven that have maybe got lost in the shuffle, they're bringing back out. That's an easy way to spend that money and get some hot baits for ice out fishing. But if you're waiting for summertime, we're seeing a real trend in UV spoons. If you haven't bought tackle in a while, maybe spend it on UV patterns of spoons, and in the brands that you have confidence in. You cannot overestimate how important confidence is. There's a lot of good tackle on the market, but if you don't have confidence in it, you throw your money away because you're going to put it in a dusty place quickly. So make sure it's something you've caught fish on in the past. Maybe freshen up some of your patterns.
So mine's going to be a lot simpler than Vince's. Don't follow somebody else's program. Have your own program, and if you have something that's working, spend your money on improving that program. If it's spoons, buy maybe some new color spoons, or you like a specific spoon manufacturer, go to them and spend that money on that. I think it's the best well-spent money and the most bang for your buck in that regard. Where we get caught up in, and I'll just as much to blame, is we get caught up in this works for Vince, so I'm going to go do it, but it doesn't work in my exact program. You've got to have a set of programs that works for you and then build on it. And if you don't, you just got to build a starting point to get to that point. Otherwise, you are, I don't want to say throwing money away, but you're going to have a lot of stuff that you're like, man, I should have done a little bit better research or homework on my part, and I would have made my money spend a little bit better. But spoons, I think, is the easiest way to spend that money and have the best bang for your buck.
Do you guys have any questions or anything you guys wanted to say before we wrap up here today?
So Anthony, what do you see for this season coming up?
My prediction for this season is going to be very similar to last season, just because of the coldness that we have. You're going to have to adapt. Right out of the chute, you're going to have to adapt to figure out what the fish really want. Of course, they're going to be looking for that warm water, but I think it's going to be few and far between to find initially, and it's going to take a while for it to warm up. So we're going to have those warm pockets, fish will be there, and then again the next day they'll be gone. That water will be moved or that water will be gone. You're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to make changes to stay on top of fish all the way, I would say, again, up to July, until we get some good, stable, warm weather that will set things up. Up to that point, we're going to have to fish.
Well,
we're going to have to work at fishing.
That's really it in a nutshell for the newer guys. Is the spring can be fool's gold. Because it can be so hot one day and you're just in the middle of it. But to Anthony's point, it's not stable. There's pockets. Maybe they've been there a few days. The bait starts to find it, fish find it, but then the wind blows wrong. In our area, that'll be a nor'easter. Devastating when it's just starting to set up in the spring. You get a big northeaster. There's nowhere for it to go, and you're pretty much back to square one. In some cases, in the western end, you can run down toward the river. This year, that's not going to be a safety net early because there's still going to be cold water coming out of the river. So those little pockets that hold temperature are going to be smaller and harder to find. And we're talking early in the year. Yeah. When you find them, it could be just balls to the wall. But after that, things get more and more stable. As the water warms up, a big blow isn't as hurtful to us. We almost anticipate what it's going to do.
Sometimes we need it.
Yeah.
We need some of that colder water to move in to help it set up or keep some of the warm water at bay, and it helps us.
I know for a fact last year that those cohos wanted to start migrating out of our area based on that warm water coming in from the Niagara River that gets to the point where they get a little antsy and they want to start moving. Even though all their needs are being met, they got depth, they got bait, temperatures right in there where metabolism's cranking, they're putting on weight, but it's warming up and they know they got to get out of there. They're all bunched up. Not all of them are going to run the same river, and they will start slowly spreading out, start moving towards their natal streams, even as early July. Here comes a big northeaster, and a lot of times it shoves them back to the west again because that water gets cold, they head for that plume, and that happened to us a couple times, and it gave us probably another 3-4 weeks of those cohos last year.
Because it ultimately comes down to is the bait. The bait gets pushed around a lot easier than the fish get pushed around, but those fish are following the bait. And that's just, wind is going to push the bait, weather, temperatures, and the bait's going to go where it goes, and then the fish are going to follow. And all those play a factor in how the season will play out. And some of it we can, predict, and some of it we can't with Mother Nature. So it's kind of like, what's going to happen? But yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be like last year.
Can you guys talk a little bit about? You said there's days when those nor'easters come in that just kind of everything shuts down. Well, you guys don't have the luxury of just saying, oh, we're not going to go fishing today. You still have to go out there. What do you guys do in those situations where conditions are acting against you and making things difficult? How do you catch fish in those days?
Well, I think the key factor is being on fish regularly, so we have an idea of where they might be moving to, or the way the wind blew, so we can kind of like hopefully predict and get ahead of them and be like, all right, this is where they were. We had a bad wind, northeastern, for instance. We need to go a little bit deeper, or we gotta go a little bit shallower based on where that temperature. Paying attention to your temperature coming out of your harbor is key. Like, what was it yesterday when you got back and when you left, and then what is it when you got leaving this morning? Is it a drastic change? Is the fish hawk saying something different than what you had yesterday? Because if it is, that's got to sway where you decide to go. Do we go east? Do we go west? Do we go north? And to find those pockets of fish. Again, remember, they're trying to find that bait, and you got to kind of put your mindset in that you're bait fishing. Where did you get pushed to? You know, you can only go so far in the shore, and then, or did you get pushed back out? And we got to get ahead of that. And that's kind of, you know, you got to somewhat be, predictive and decide where you want to go. And sometimes we call it, you got to make your bed, and you got to make a run, and we try to find the fish and go with that. But yeah,
they seamlessly make the change. You know, the targets, it's not a big deal to them. I've been on some super bites when the water's changing, but they act like there will be no tomorrow, but it could end quickly. You know, they're feeding like crazy because they're going to be about to have their whole world disrupted. But like Anthony said, it's really about where that temperature and bait gets relocated to, and those fish are going to be there.
I mean, sometimes you can predict it as we're fishing, and it's like each catch is a little bit, maybe we'll say, deeper than the last catch. Like, okay, and then it's like, all right, we got our fish. Well, tomorrow we're probably going to start at the deeper level because the fish kept getting deeper and deeper, because they know way before we know with barometric pressure what's happening. So you got to like remember that for the next day, that our last fish was in 300 foot of water and we started in 100. So starting in 100 is probably not going to be good. We're going to waste a lot of time.
And we've mainly talked about they're relocating, but when it comes to how you're going to attack them, go with the most proven stuff the last few days. It's not the time for big experimentation.
100%.
Absolutely not the time for that, because the fish that are feeding when all this change is going on will fall to the same things that worked in recent days. It's just a matter of they're not as densely packed and they're on the move.
And I also find in a hard bite, typically going with a smaller lure versus a bigger lure helps that bite a little bit until you can zero in on them and be like, all right, you know, this is where they are. And then mix in some standard, we'll say standard spoons or even mag spoons, or, you know, and then, you know, maybe they don't want that, they want the smaller. Just, I think overall, there's more feed between, you know, emerald shiners and alewives, and there's more that run on the smaller side than the bigger side, we'll say, with big alewives and that. They're there, but when it's getting tough, if you can mimic more that's out there, you're better chances of hooking up on something.
We got Impulsive Sport Fishing just dropping in, kind of agreeing with you guys. This is our Coho run here in the southern basin of Lake Huron, very slow compared to years past. Water went from ice cold to hot with hardly any time in between. Temperature is everything, no matter where you are. We did get a question from Jeff, though. He wants to know, where can you buy artificial meat? Where can they find your stuff?
So here at the show right now, you can find it at the Musclehead booth. We have the Musclehead has the booth down there, and it's sitting right with all his stuff. And then any other time, you can go right on my Facebook page, and we can get it through there.
Okay, what's that Facebook page?
Anthony Ellis or Redemption Charters.
Redemption Charters.
Yep,
There you go.
either one.
Redemption Charters on Facebook. Vince, anything else that you wanted to ask or say before we wrap up here today?
No, just come on down if you're within driving distance and say hello, and good luck on the water.
Awesome. We'll have Vince back again later this weekend. Always a pleasure to have him on the show, and I know people enjoy listening to him and his information. It's good. I don't want to make you sound old, Vince, but you've been doing this for 40 plus years now, so he knows a few things about catching fish, so it's good to have him on there. And Anthony, always appreciate having you on. We had you on last year and really enjoyed it and went well, and appreciate you back on here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, guys, thanks so much for watching.